Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Earlier this morning, Myanmar's military announced a state of emergency for 1 year, with all legislative, executive and judicial powers transferred to top Army Commander General Min Aung Hlaing. Myanmar's parliament was supposed to convene today, ushering in the incumbent National League for Democracy into its second term. So the general elections back in November saw a landslide win for the NLD, but also significant losses for the military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party, or USDP. Now, while election authorities and international observers agreed that the elections were free and fair, the army and some ethnic minority parties have claimed fraud. But is this sufficient justification for the coup? Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at the implications of the military coup on human rights and democracy, and the well-being of its citizens in Myanmar. So joining us first on the show, we have Charles Santiago. He's the chair of the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. Good evening, Charles. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. So ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, they've called for a restoration of democracy and for the military to return to their barracks. Now, the Myanmar Military Command has said that the country's constitution actually allows for them to intervene. Is this claimed legality of the coup sufficient to justify it, Charles?
Thanks, Melissa and Sharaad, for having me for the next couple of minutes. I think, as a background, the 2008 Constitution was not a democratically drafted or adopted constitution. It was designed by the military for the military. So they're trying to give legitimacy to the unjustificable. Let's be clear, what they're doing here is an illegal power grab from a democratically elected government.
Charles, I mean, the claims of fraud, and I understand, within your grouping, the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, is this something that you look at? I mean, the issue of whether an election brought to power in a sufficiently free and fair manner, is that something that concerned you about the November elections?
I think, in general, the UN, including other observers, polls observers, essentially said that it was a free and fair election. But I think since November last year, when the NLD won 396 of the 476 seats, which is a landslide victory of sorts, I think that brought fear to the government, to the army, in terms of their vulnerability and their role in the future of Myanmar. And I think come January, they learned something from Trump, where Trump accused Biden of stealing the elections. So I think that gave them a bit of legitimacy to say, hey, these NLD guys were actually, they stole the election. Now, there's no basis for this at all. There's absolutely no basis at all. And therefore, I think this is quite clear that the Myanmar military is essentially has power grab, an illegal power grab against a democratically elected government. In fact, this government won 396 of the 476 seats, which is quite significant.
Right. Charles, ASEAN has issued a statement, and they've referred to the ASEAN Charter's principles of democracy. They're also the pursuance of dialogue and reconciliation and the return to normalcy. Now, I'm wondering whether you expect this to have any material effect on how the military junta negotiates this coup they seem to have engineered.
I think Myanmar in general really has no time for ASEAN. And because they know that ASEAN needs, the ASEAN businessmen and the ASEAN countries need Myanmar's resources. So they're quite okay with pussyfooting with ASEAN. But I think what is interesting about ASEAN's statement is this push for reconciliation and normalcy in accordance with the will and the interests of the people of Myanmar. This is quite interesting, though, the will and the interests of the people of Myanmar. Of course, it's all subject to interpretation. But what is the will and the interests of the people of Myanmar? It is to get NLD to run the government, to manage the government, because they were the duly elected, duly democratically elected government. So I think it all depends on what you read into ASEAN. Of course, what I would have liked to have seen is a much more stronger language coming from ASEAN. But I think the stronger language came from Indonesia, though, where they actually pushed Myanmar to say, hey, we signed on to the principles of the ASEAN Charter. There's a need for rule of law, a good governance, and ASEAN and Myanmar has to follow the principle of democracy and a constitutional government. So I think, of course, there are differences within ASEAN itself, but you can see that normally ASEAN would simply say, please keep talking to each other, have the dialogue going on. But now they've gone one step further, and I think I'm reading to the extreme, where they said, go back to the will and the interest of the people of Myanmar, which means give it back to the people, the democratically elected government of Myanmar.
Charles, it's interesting that you say that Indonesia had maybe framed it in stronger terms. Seeing how Indonesia itself had ushered itself out of military control of the democratic process, with Dwi Fungsi, and it successfully negotiated a transition to genuine democracy. What do you think has gone wrong in Myanmar? Why is it that the military seems unable to step back from politics? Is it because they failed to get their party elected in significant numbers? That if they had been more successful, that perhaps this might not have happened? I think
this is a very complex question, but I think among the answer to this complex question is the role of the commander-in-chief, the new commander-in-chief, Min Aung Hlaing. I think that's how it's pronounced. His name is pronounced. And this guy is quite an interesting character, because he's actually wanted by the United Nations for genocide against the Rohingya. My only fear is now he's the commander, and he will now complete the job that he set out to do, not only in Rakhine State, but also in Kachin State, in Chin State, where there's other ethnic states in Myanmar, where they're having this conflict with the military. So this 1 year will give them a huge space in order to wipe out all of these guys. And of course, and they've also said, I think later this evening, that they will have an elections in the next year. I think this is quite telling, because what they might actually do is that they might actually ban the NLD, which is what happened in Cambodia. So they might learn something from Cambodia. Or they might actually ban Aung San Suu Kyi from contesting in the next elections. But that will be fraudulent. That will be fraudulent, because you have a legitimately elected government that is already there, that's already governing. And now you have a backdoor government through a coup d'etat. And therefore, I think,
Yeah, Charles, sorry to interrupt you. We have a minute or so left, and I'm just wondering, when news surfaced of this military coup in Myanmar, there was a lot of talk about, Malaysia's also in a state of emergency. Do you see parallels between the two countries?
Well, clearly, this is not only true for Malaysia, but it's also true largely for a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, where backdoor governments are now running the government, where the constitutionally elected government are no longer in place, and they have been replaced in Malaysia, in Myanmar, in Cambodia, and also in Thailand as well. So you see this practice, that is something that we did not see for so many years, but it's becoming common in Southeast Asia. So there are lots of similarities to you.
Charles, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your time and you sharing your insights. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break. More on Consider This in just a couple minutes. Stay tuned.
Masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face masks, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga. Elakkan 3S, iaitu kawasan yang sesak, sempit dan juga bersembang pada jarak yang dekat. Berdisiplinlah kerana virus ini tidak mengira darjat, umur mahupun latar belakang anda. Tiada masa untuk kita berlengah lagi.
Kita sekarang telah memasuki gelombang ketiga COVID-19. Setiap langkah pencegahan perlu diamalkan dengan penuh tanggungjawab dan disiplin. Kita mampu meratakan lengkung pandemik ini. Semuanya di tangan kita bersama.
Perang COVID-19 masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. We continue our look at the military coup in Myanmar, which comes after a landslide win by Aung San Suu Kyi's party in an election last November, in which the army claims was marred by fraud. Joining us on the line now, we have Bridget Welsh, who is with the Asia Research Institute at University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Good evening, Bridget. Thanks for joining us on the show. So this military coup has been framed as the armed forces seizing power from a democratic government. But it's also been noted that the military had never truly given up power. So were the signs always there that Myanmar's democracy was actually far more fragile than we had thought?
Well, the military created this constitution in 2008, which basically made sure that they held on to power in terms of holding key ministries, as well as having 25% of all the legislative bodies. And also in the last few years, we've seen the military gain more traction within government. So the fact is that it has always been, military power has always been there, and it has been very fragile. And in many ways, when people looked at the system, they always assessed it as whether or not it was actually from a human rights perspective and others, not recognizing that the battle inside was always between the NLD and the military. And we've seen that come out into the streets today.
Bridget, what about this man at the center of the storm, the army commander, General Min Aung Hlaing? He was due to retire in July. And is this, some people speculate, just about his personal ambition, or is there something more at stake with this coup?
I think they're both personal and institutional interests. The personal interests are very clearly centered around Min Aung Hlaing, who wanted to be president. He was pushing for a position in the new government, of which it was not being given to him. In the months before this coup, what we've seen is he's consolidated people around at the key leadership positions, people from his own faction, and he's shown that he's had these ambitions for a long time. And it's not just about political power, because as we know in Southeast Asia, it's also about business interests. His family is involved in the economy, and the military itself has a lot of business interests. But it goes beyond him, however, because what's happened is in the November 8th election, the party that was representing the military, the USDP, lost its role as a buffer. So there was a more direct confrontation between the military and the NLD. And what that meant is that the possibility of military power being checked, being pushed back through constitutional reforms, through their role in the economy, was much more real than it was before. And I think the military interests are also behind some of the push to try to control and maintain their position inside the government. And of course, when that failed through negotiation and failed in issues of electoral fraud that were being claimed, now we saw the coup that happened today.
Bridget, could this have been avoided was there something the NLD could have done in terms of confidence building or the like in order to help the military kind of stay its hand, as it were?
Look, I think not everyone is privy to what exactly happened in the negotiations in terms of the dynamic, but I think that there are speculation that, in fact, that both sides were quite hardening, and that there wasn't an ability. Things broke down pretty early, and I think some of this has to come from the fact that the NLD had such a large mandate, and in the sense, and it was trying to defend its position in terms of the results that it had. And I think that the negotiations broke apart, and I think that in this regard, things could perhaps have been handled somewhat differently. But the fact is that you can't look back. The fact is you've had a coup, and now it's a question of how to deal with the situation as it stands now.
Right, Bridget, what do you think is the long-term, the game plan, the longer game plan here for the military? We understand that the timing of the coup perhaps might have been linked to the fact that the Parliament was supposed to convene this morning. But what do you think the military junta will plan to do in this 1 year that they've given themselves to run the country?
Well, in the history of the military in Myanmar, 1 year is not 1 year. It's a longer time. We've seen in the course of the day, they have started to do two things. One is that they have articulated the use of COVID-19 as a legitimizing agenda for themselves in terms of the priorities, taking over the control of health, talking about the need to address the crisis by taking power. So we've seen a legitimizing narrative take place. And part of that is also a traditional narrative used by the military, which is to address the ethnic conflicts. The second thing, however, that we can also see is they're trying to take over other parts of the media and to take over the key positions, removing people from television outlets and others to be able to sort of control that narrative. So they're taking it and taking power and also shaping the narrative about them being in power. And the fact is that much of that comes from the old patterns of the past. And they're in a situation that is very different. You've had the last 5 years of more democratic system. I mean, obviously there have been a lot of flaws in the system in Myanmar. We just have to look at the Rohingya crisis to know that. But the fact is that it's a more open system, and I think there's going to be a very significant disconnect between the narratives that the military are trying to perpetuate and that of the majority of society looking at the military having taken power in such a way that's done.
Sorry to intervene. One minute left. I want to ask you about Aung San Suu Kyi's apparent call to resist the coup. There's some dispute as to whether it is her, because it was, in fact, apparently written before the coup happened. What do you make of this call for resistance to the coup?
Well, I think that we don't know if this is accurate or not. We do know, however, that NLD leaders have asked their supporters to stay calm, and we've seen in incidents of many pro-military individuals in the streets, creating some sort of havoc in terms of the bullying and others. So people who had their flags flying for the NLD in their houses have pulled them back. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't real anger to what has happened in the coup. I think people are watching at this particular juncture, and I think they're waiting because I think they want to many people in the NLD want to make sure that this incident does not actually lead to greater violence on the streets for all concerned.
Bridget, thank you for your time tonight. We really do appreciate you joining us on the show. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This More in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
masih belum berakhir. Dalam kita berusaha memutuskan rantaian wabak ini, kita jangan terpedaya dengan virus maklumat palsu. Simak fakta melalui www.astroawani.com atau aplikasi Astro Awani. Teruskan berdisiplin, ratakan lengkungan pandemik ini.
The third wave of COVID-19 has taken us by storm. There's no room to take anything lightly. Everyone must follow all the steps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing, face masks, follow these steps, this SOP with the utmost discipline. Together, we can flatten the curve.
Perang COVID-19 tetap belum berakhir. Pastikan setiap langkah berjaga-jaga diamalkan, dari kebersihan tangan, pemakaian pelitup muka, penjarakan fizikal. Kesemuanya amat penting untuk pastikan pandemik ini dibendung.
Fokus kita sekarang adalah gelombang ketiga.
Hi, thanks for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our conversation about the military coup in Myanmar and the implications this will have throughout the region. Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers is from the Department of International and Strategic Studies at University of Malaya, and he joins us on the line now. Good evening, Roy. China has responded to the coup. They've come out to say that they hope all sides in Myanmar can work out their differences within the constitutional and legal framework. But the speculation has been that China may have even approved of this coup. I'm wondering whether you think that's an adequate understanding of China's role.
Right, thank you so much. Well, I mean, there have been speculations about the role of China in this coup and all. But to me, at this moment, it's too new to actually say yes or no. But what is certain is that China has huge investment in Myanmar. As we know that the Myanmar-China Economic Corridor, the Belt and Road Initiatives and all. So with this coup, definitely Myanmar will be destabilized to a certain extent, and we wouldn't know how the NLD supporters will react in the next few days or even in the next few weeks. So a destabilized Myanmar definitely will be a disadvantage for China as well. That is clear. So at this moment, I think China is very cautious about the coup in Myanmar and is hoping that it can be resolved, or it will not destabilize its economic interests in Myanmar.
Yeah, right. I wonder if people, or in fact, some in the media, make these false equivalents, saying that because China is an authoritarian state, that it's probably more aligned to the military in Myanmar than it would be to, say, the NLD and the democratically elected government there. But is that true? If we try to understand what the relationships might be between China and these different stakeholders in Myanmar, tell us how you understand that.
I mean, yes, I mean, in the sense that the military junta is not democratic, okay, and while China is practicing socialist policies and all. But as I mentioned earlier on, a destabilized Myanmar as a result of the coup definitely will also, it doesn't benefit China at all in that sense, because if there is demonstrations, sanctions against Myanmar, okay, this will not be good for business in Myanmar in general, and also that includes Chinese investment into the region. So I would say that the coup is not too beneficial for China and even surrounding countries.
Roy, you mentioned sanctions. Do you think sanctions are likely to be placed upon the military junta in Myanmar? And do you think that they might likely work in reversing this coup?
Yes. If situation doesn't improve, if what has occurred in the past, as for example, what happened in 1990 after there was the elections, the NLD won, and then results were not accepted, and there was a sanction. And if this were to happen again now, I believe it may lead to reactivation of these sanctions, because these sanctions have kind of subsided or have been down since the democratic reforms that have occurred in the recent years. But if things turn back or make a U-turn, I won't be surprised EU, the United States will reactivate these sanctions.
Right. Apart from business interests, China also plays a role in, say, the discussions of the repatriation of the Rohingya refugees. I understand that Myanmar, Bangladesh, and China held tripartite talks recently on the repatriation. Do you expect that in this regard, on humanitarian issues like the Rohingya question, that we will see again a postponement or maybe even a cessation of this repatriation exercise?
Yeah, because you see now with a new government in Myanmar, in the past it was led by the NLD with Aung San Suu Kyi. Now there's a new government with the military. So new negotiations, new policies may be established in the next couple of weeks or so. So that will include this issue on the Rohingyas and all. So we still have to wait and see what is the next policy. But I believe for the military junta now, the most important thing is they have to convince the people, the ordinary people in Myanmar, that their act of this coup is justified.
Right. Well, you brought that up a little bit earlier. You said that there could be demonstrations or even unrest. Do you expect there to be public anger over this coup, especially so soon after an election, and from the millions of people who placed Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD in power for another term of government? Yeah,
as I mentioned that I can foresee in the next few days or weeks, there will be some form of maybe demonstrations or expression of unhappiness, as you yourself or as all of us here we be aware that the NLD has won with a large margin during the November elections. And now what has occurred, diehard supporters of NLD definitely are not happy. In fact, there are already demonstrations that have occurred by the diasporas of Myanmar, diasporas in Japan and even in Bangkok. So I'm expecting that such demonstrations may occur within Myanmar. So the task of now the military junta now is to convince the people that their act is justified, so that it can try and minimize the possibility of such demonstration. But having said that, I don't think people will easily accept that, because looking at what have occurred in the past. And also another point that I'd like to highlight is about this 1 year, they say to give them 1 year, but there are many issues that may not be able to be settled within a year. For example, the issue of COVID-19, and then the issue of peace negotiation with the various ethnic minorities and all. So this coup may lead even longer than what is expected of a year.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Roy, for joining us on the show tonight. Those were great insights. Thank you for sharing them with us. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thanks so much for watching, and good night.